have some dialogue. Let me turn it over initially to Mayor Hart, who I know is with us this morning, and introduce our new police chief in Waterloo. Quentin?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Carrie. Cedar Valley. We were trying to decide what would be the best weekend possible to bring in a police chief. We were in the midst of COVID, and then we are in the midst of different uprisings all across the country. So we thought it'd be best to swear him in on June 1st, but via Philadelphia, Fort Worth, Missouri City, we had an incredible opportunity to bring on Dr. Joel Fitzgerald to the Waterloo family and to the Cedar Valley family. So we're very thankful for him to be here. We haven't allowed him to get any rest yet, but come right in, full steam ahead. And we're so honored to have him on the Zoom call today. So without further ado, Dr. Fitzgerald.
Good morning. I understand I'm going to be answering a series of questions. So in order not to be more verbose than I normally am, I think I should let you start lobbing the questions and then just dive right into, answering what you already have. You introduced me and pretty much, already admitted that you didn't start paying me until well after I started the job. So we're going to use that against you, Mayor, and make sure that you backdate my start date. But anyway, what questions do you have? And I'd be happy to.
You bet. Good morning, Chief. The group you're with this morning is our Grow Cedar Valley organization that is our local economic development engine, as well as our Chamber of Commerce. The business leaders on this call, we've been getting together for the last couple of months now, primarily with the topic around the health of our community and talking about COVID and how we're responding to that as a community. So it's nice to have a new face join us this morning and maybe talk about a new topic here. So welcome to our community. If you would, maybe a minute or two, just give a little bit of your background as you come here to Waterloo.
Sure. I'm a graduate of Villanova University. I went on from Villanova to go to Eastern University for my MBA and North Central for my Ph.D. in 2013. I became a police officer in 1992 in the city of Philadelphia Police Department. And I worked in Philadelphia until 2009. I rose through the ranks and left in 2009 to pursue my first police chief job. That was in the city of Missouri City, Texas. I was in Missouri City, Texas as police chief from 2009 till late 2013 when I became chief of police in the city of Allentown, Pennsylvania Police Department. From December of 13 to October 15, I stayed in Allentown until being hired by the city of Fort Worth, Texas. I was in Fort Worth, Texas until 2019, be May of 2019, when later in the year I became part of the transition team for the new Philadelphia the Philadelphia Sheriff's Office. A newly elected Philadelphia sheriff who'd worked for me in the city of Philadelphia took office, and I was part initially of her transition team, and then she asked me to be her chief deputy, where I served until June 1st and came aboard here as the chief of police in the city of Waterloo.
Well, Chief, welcome to Waterloo. Maybe share a little bit about your initial observations of our community.
It was really hard to get a good assessment of the community because when I got to town, in the times that I visited, it was virtually no one out. It was due to the COVID restrictions, and I didn't really get a good, feel or assessment of the community just because of the fact that, the access to people was limited. The first true community engagement that I had was Friday or two ago when the first protest happened within the city. And I was able to work with Major Joe Leibold to strategize on how we would respond and take part in the community protest. I think you all saw that we took a different tact and walked with the crowd, became part of the crowd, and really made people feel not only safe and secure, but help people to understand that we empathize with everything that's going on in the country today. We certainly understand that policing can do a great deal to help communities, but we can also damage communities. And that following Monday, I was involved in, I'd like to call it a roundtable discussion, but it was more like a mob discussion where I spoke with, several hundred people over the course of a few hours out at Lincoln Park, and really heard the passion from the community, from all walks of the community, in reference to how they felt policed and how they felt maybe we weren't living up to necessarily living up to, I should say, the expectations of the community. So I reassured them that we would be looking at things from a different lens and moving in a direction more so inclusive of members of the community. That includes all stakeholders, business owners, and your residents in the community, and just creating sort of a plan moving forward that was truly inclusive.
So from your perspective, as you come here to Waterloo, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges ahead for you? What might some of your priorities be?
Well, clearly developing trust and developing that trust with the racially polarized section of the community is going to be the real uphill battle here. I feel like what I heard was there was a disconnect between members of our racially polarized and economically disadvantaged communities. And they felt to a certain degree over-policed and underrepresented in the decision-making process as it relates to police in general. And I understand where they're coming from. I also understand that we have a responsibility to the folks, the stakeholders in our community that are business owners and business leaders as well. So there's a balance that one has to strike, and that is making sure that members of the community don't act in a way inconsistent with, what business owners in the community see as a fruitful way of developing the city of Waterloo. And that would be, not only marching, but marching and then participating in things that would damage the image of Waterloo or damage people's businesses. Moving forward, I just foresee us working to create a true strategic plan, being part of focus groups to discuss what it is we're doing and why, and what kind of SMART goals we set for the department. But also, working with members of the community to create a policy and procedures committee so people understand what we're doing and why and how we measure up to other departments, either on a state level or nationally. And in many ways, for example, today we're releasing a new use of force policy. It's been tweaked over the last week or so, but you'll find that it is really probably exceeds policy standards on a national level. But the only way citizens or residents or business owners get to understand or see that is if they can compare that policy to what the old policy looks like and, sort of what the national standards look like. So bringing people in, having them populate a committee of folks that actually are, give a critical review to our policies and understand what it is we're doing, why we do it, and what regulations we do it under, helps make them the best ambassadors of change in the community. You can go out and tell people you understand and had a part in creating this policy or this procedure. You can explain why police do things the way they do. And it's helped me in other communities, and I have no doubt that it'll help here.
Chief, can you give us at a high level what's really part of that policy?
Well, it's about, I think it's about 16 pages long, sure. But it's really reinforces the duty to intervene regardless of what rank you are within this department or what stature you have. reminding officers that no matter who you are, you have a duty to act in a responsible manner and a legal manner. We have also a duty to de-escalate situations. Very often you see police officers come to a scene and sometimes it inflames the whatever problem is there. And that's not what we want to see out of our police officers. We want to see them take a step back. We want them to see that there's that there are alternate means by which we can solve problems. And that can be with the help of the community, and that can be giving a really critical look at how we're responding to things. Our use of force policy needed to really emphasize the fact that force should be the last option and sanctity of life should be our primary mantra. So what you'll see out of this new policy is just as an affirmation. I won't say a reaffirmation, but it's an affirmation of our stance as far as what our expectations are, how an officer has responsibility for the actions that they take, and the other officers have a similar responsibility to ensure that if an officer is not behaving within the confines of our policies and procedures and social norms, they need to tap those people out and step up and take charge. It goes into far more than that, but I can tell you again, situations are allowed to escalate, and de-escalation has really been a huge part of what successful departments in the country use to intervene in some tense situations. I'm sure you have other questions.
Sure, no, that's great, and thank you for that.
I could probably go on for another hour talking.
Well, thank you for that. We hear a lot today about the idea of community policing. What are your thoughts and views on the idea of community policing?
Well, community policing in the large sense or overall sense involves things that I think many departments don't understand, and that is procedural justice, reducing implicit bias, and really dedicating to the training of your officers that's necessary to hold officers accountable for not employing implicit biases in communities that don't look, walk, or talk like them. That type of training is on average about 10 hours a class, so it's a real investment in the department to engage in that type of training, but it does reinforce some of the tenets of traditional community policing, and that is working with the community to solve problems, building a sense of procedural justice or trust with community members, banking goodwill, and to go more into procedural justice, accepting and understanding that although police officers today may not have been alive in 1968 or prior to that, we have to assume a certain responsibility for the industry. And we can't deny that policing across the United States have had disparate impacts on minority communities. And really, that's what minority communities want us to understand, that there's been a generational effect that's had on communities. Social status, access to education, access to things that the majority have access to, and that comes from a cycle of disparate treatment. And when officers can empathize with the community and help them to understand that, hey, we recognize these things happen, and we recognize the police were the tool in some ways that cause generational income gaps, then we take a step in the right direction towards just in the eyes of the community, being people that understand their plight, and we can move forward.
We have a question that came in, and before I ask that, just a reminder, this session today is being recorded. We'll be able to share that out with members of this call. And also, if you would put your Zoom on mute, just helps with any of the background noise. So along those same lines, how can the police force here in Waterloo help with creating an environment of economic inclusion in our community?
Economically, a police department, as I mentioned in my last statement, we can do damage economically because, if a community, let's say, protests and destroys their own community or destroys our ability to market ourselves as a safe community or a community with attractions, I'm told, I'll refer back to 1968 again. I was told there were riots here in the city of Waterloo that now you're still not recovered from. So there are areas of the community that were developed and had businesses and had economic, some businesses were economically thriving, but torn down or burned, and the community still has yet to recover. So a police department having the kind of rapport with members of the community that is productive, that is positive, and that indicates inclusivity, can do a lot to mitigate the possible damage that a broken relationship can have and lead to the problems we're seeing across the country. Thankfully, here in the city of Waterloo, we've only had a few instances of true crime during protests. But I think a lot has to do with the way we included ourselves in the protest, how quickly we made statements about, what we feel and how we don't believe that, what happened in Minnesota or in other cities across the country were handled properly by the police officers that were there. You'll find that this police department understands that a lot of bad apples have really spoiled the bunch, across this country. So my mantra for them is making them understand that one bad apple in the city of Waterloo can create the firestorm across the country that, the 18,000 other police departments have to. And again, go back to economics. You have people pushing for defunding police departments when that's the last thing we should be thinking about economically in our country. You defund police departments, and they use Camden, New Jersey as an example of defunding. I say that was just a restructuring of a police department due to the county perhaps not being able to pay for what they had as far as police services were concerned. It wasn't a defunding in the purest sense where places like Minnesota are looking to defund a police department. Camden's a bad example to use, but people are using it as an example to say, hey, this police department was defunded and they thrived. Well, no, that's not exactly what happened. Coming from somebody that lives in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, I can tell you that that's not what happened, and that's not an answer. Knee-jerk reactions like that are going to be, what damages the economic foundation of communities for years to come. If you don't take a really inclusive and strategic look at the impacts that you could face from politically motivated decisions, look at a great example might be Colorado, right? And being one of the first states to legalize, let's say, marijuana, but yet not having the infrastructure in place to deal with the legalization. We have to take a really good, hard, technologically sound, and a responsible look at things before we enact policies that can damage the economic viability of the community for years to come. And I may have jumped all over the place to a certain degree, but I'm trying to give you enough realistic scenarios that make you think, well, hey, if we jump to this conclusion, what are going to be the economic hurdles that we have to get over for years to come? And some communities across the country will never recover from that. And I seriously hope that a city like Minneapolis does not, take that type of tack, because we're going to again see now the repercussions across the country from that type of knee-jerk reaction, and it's going to exponentially hurt the economy.
No, it's great. Thank you for kind of connecting those dots, I think, between law enforcement and just the economic vitality of a community. We have a question that came in, and I'll read this to you, Chief. How are officers going to be trained on the new policy, and how will it be enforced? Do you think police union policies might conflict with this new policy in any way? And if so, could it affect your ability to enforce the policy? So there's some points of conflict there. What are your thoughts?
Well, there could be points of conflict. If the last thing you want is for the union or any union to, have some kind of issue with any policy or procedure. But what I do is stay within the realm of what a police chief can or cannot do as far as policy creation is concerned. If I don't do anything that materially affects a police contract, then that is the policy that we are going to actually stick to. I would love to be able to have the type of input from everyone, to put the greatest policy together in the world. And I will have input from people, from this point forward. But right now, we need a policy and procedure that, ceases the bad activity, promotes the kind of thought process that a police officer should have, the checks and balances that need to be in place to ensure that people are treated with decency and respect. And I don't think anyone in the community is going to disagree with that. And, again, when I interviewed for this job, I talked about, being inclusive and having everybody sit down and make decisions when possible. This is not one of those situations where we can kick around a policy question for months and, come to some kind of mutual understanding. What we have to agree upon mutually is that the sanctity of human life is the most important thing. And it's the most important reason why we as guardians in the community exist. If we can't agree upon that, then folks are going to find themselves in the wrong line of work. And again, there are going to be the things that happen that a police chief can discuss with everyone, but then there are going to be the things that a police chief has to do as the leader of the organization to change the way we do business. And this is that reset the clock moment that a police chief needs to establish how things moving forward are going to be done in the police department.
You may see the next question that popped up on our chat. What's the proper role of citizens in oversight of a police department?
Well, it really depends. You want to have the best policies, the best procedures. And if you have the best policies and procedures and you have a chief that is actually holding people to not only policy, procedure, but your mission, vision, values, and guiding principles, then most citizens aren't questioning whether we are disciplining people in the right manner, or they're not questioning the investigations of a department, or whether you can be trusted to manage yourself. I found that many of the agencies that lack that kind of trust, lack the teeth in the policy or teeth in the procedure or specificity needed to hold someone accountable for not working within that construct. I do think that citizens have to have an active role in the policy creation and review process. But with that being said, we need to make sure that citizens are brought to the table from all walks of life, and from universities, from business leadership and such, from city management. They learn what it is that police officers do, why they do it, how our policies and procedures measure up statewide, and how they measure up nationally. And you'll find that some of our policies, if not the things we're working on now, will exceed some national level mandates on what people are looking for in policies and procedures. So should we automatically default to the fact that people have to have investigative authority within a police department right off the bat, or should we take the time to learn about what the police department does, why we do it, what the policy creation process is, what goes into it, and how that measures up before we start saying that a police chief can't manage their own police department and can't administer discipline. I think that's a conversation to be had before we default to that. We need a outside agency to review what's going on. Just understanding what it is we do and why we do it first.
Excellent. This may be a question for both you, Chief, as well as you, Mr. Mayor. as business leaders that you have on this call, what can we do to help? What can we do to help support our local, our police department, and just continue to have our community heal?
I can answer, the mayor.
Go ahead, Chief. You have the floor.
Okay. One thing I'll tell you is, we always can use the training. We always can use, people. For example, one of the complaints that we have is that police officers don't have enough crisis intervention training. That's another training that we rely on officers getting to be able to assess what it is they're doing, to say, hey, we need to, really look at, what we're responding to, who we're talking to, and maybe what they're going through. So crisis intervention training and crisis intervention teams are what I've created in other departments, where we pair a police officer that has been specifically trained in crisis intervention with, say, someone that is a psychologist who is willing to go out with a police officer 4 or 6 or 8 hours. And then we do some proactive contacts with members of our community that may or may not be seeking the sort of treatments that they need. We know that during the course of working, and when we look at who's inhabiting our jails, that many of the people in our jails, if not the greater majority, are folks with mental health issues or in crisis. And we're not dedicating, in my opinion, enough to, as not just the police department, county, as the nation, we aren't dedicating enough resources to proactively going and ensuring that those types of, people with those types of problems are being served properly. So police departments have really worked to engage in that CIT training. I already mentioned procedural justice and implicit bias training. I mentioned de-escalation. Now hitting the mayor with, hey, we need to get all of our people these different training classes at 10 hours of training, puts a tremendous financial strain on the police department. And, while we're going through the COVID crisis, you're getting hit from every angle. And what I would ask is that the business community really look to help us facilitate bringing these trainers in to get our officers that kind of training, and to offset some of what the city might see as a tremendous hit to the training budget within the police department. I am committed to make sure our folks get that training. I just don't want to have to piecemeal it. I would love to be, if we have monthly training here, and I'd love to be able to move forward with getting our folks what I think is going to be a prerequisite for departments across the country.
That's great. Mr. Mayor.
Well, I echo those comments too, with regards to training and support. Is always highly important. I would also probably add to understand that the Waterloo Police Department is a resource as well. Oftentimes we're communicated with when there's a response to a situation. But as far as preventative opportunities and working together in collaborations, know that you have an incredible resource out there to support you. And I would also probably say too, Waterloo historically gets a bad rap for a lot, and find out what's fact before we may perpetuate a stance or a thought. That's always appreciative to find out what's really happening versus the rumor mill, which has perpetually hurt us over the past many years.
That's great. We are here at 10:30. With respect to everyone's time, we'll wrap this up. Mr. Mayor, thank you. Police Chief Fitzgerald, great to have you in our community. Welcome. We're here as a resource. Don't be afraid to reach out. We welcome you and your family to the Cedar Valley, and we look forward to continuing to have our Cedar Valley area grow thrive and succeed together. So thank you. Thanks for being with us this morning. We look forward to maybe having you back in a few months and get your observations of where we're at and where we're going.
I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all.
Thank you. Betty, I think we're out.